Lord Jesus, thank you for this Sabbath day. Thank you for being our friend. Lord, we ask that in everything we do, that we would glorify your name, Jesus. Teach us to trust you. Teach us to follow you closely. Help us to understand the times in which we live and to be effective soldiers in your kingdom. Help us to reach your lost sheep with the message of your goodness and truth and mercy that you poured out at the cross. Lead us and guide us, Lord, in this remaining time of Earth's history. In your holy name alone we pray, Jesus. Amen. Good afternoon, church. I got an interesting presentation. It begins in about the year 2009, when I had been working on a project called the Genesis Pattern, and based on study of the Bible, I began to see similarities that reflected natural fractal patterns. And in examining the Bible with these pattern similarities, some interesting things began to come out of the Bible and be more evident. In the year 2015, I was asked by my good friend Sandy Watkins to speak to the church. And she come and she says, "Could you give your testimony to the church tonight?" And I said, "Sandy, I don't have anything prepared." She says, "Oh, you'll be fine. Just go ahead." So I did. I spoke to the church assembled right here at the Lake Hartwell Park in Lake Hartwell, South Carolina. It was October the 23rd of 2015. And I briefly shared my testimony with the church. And in doing so, I explained that the Lord had really drawn me out of darkness and saving me and causing me to be a Christian and to see the world in a different way. And that as He pulled me out of darkness, I began to see things around me more clearly. And as I looked at what was going on in the world and compared it to my Bible studies, I told the church, I said, "Now, as part of what I'm telling you, I want to give you a little bit of a warning. Based on my Bible study, Donald Trump is going to be our next president." Now, why would this have seemed odd? Well, he was running against 17 other Republicans, including Ben Carson, and he was running against the chief Democratic opponent, Hillary Clinton. And this was in October of 2015, which was a full 13 months before the election would take place. And as I explained these things, and why I felt that, based on my Bible study, that Donald Trump was a pattern of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, sent against God's people as a correction for their wickedness. And that to better understand what was ahead of us, we needed to study Daniel and the events surrounding the Babylonian captivity and King Nebuchadnezzar. And then I said, and if he brings in Ben Carson in as vice president into his administration, that's a sign from God that we're in for 7 years of severe testing as a church. Well, I know that was unusual to hear, and I told people, I said, this is not prophecy, it's just based on pattern. And a few people took issue with that, and they said, that's not right, you can't say that, you have no way of knowing that. And I said, well, I'm not trying to be dogmatic, it's just what I see based on the study of Bible pattern. And it was about 120 people there from our church and a few other visiting churches. And to this day, a few people remember it, most ignored it. One got up and argued and said, that's not possible, he doesn't have the poll numbers, it's just not going to happen. And I said, well, whatever. I said, we'll see, it's just what I'm seeing based on Bible pattern. Here's one of those witnesses that was there. He was a teenager at the time.
Remember that? I was there. It was October 2015, Shrine SDA church camp out, Lake Hartwell, South Carolina. There was about 100 people there total. And Dad was talking, and he said that based on his study of the Bible, that Donald Trump would be the next president of the United States, that he was a pattern of Nebuchadnezzar, and that the church was in for a 7-year period of testing, severe testing. And I remember there was a couple people that stood up and interrupted the presentation on the objection that Donald Trump could never be our president because his poll numbers were in the single digits back in 2015.
So I understand how odd that seemed. I really do. But in hindsight, I was telling the truth. And just here in writing, I basically said, based on the study of the Bible pattern, Donald Trump was a pattern of Nebuchadnezzar sent against Jerusalem for its wickedness. And if he was elected as president, brought Ben Carson in as his vice president, it would be a sign from God that the church was in for 7 years of severe testing. In October 23rd of 2015, I had no idea how right that would be. So it was warning number one. Let's jump ahead to 2016. I had discovered a book called Hebrew Word Pictures by Dr. Frank T. Seekins. And it gave a study and an in-depth insight into Hebrew and the origins of the Hebrew language and the iterations that the Hebrew alphabet has passed through over history. And the main point of his work was to express the concept that the original Hebrew was a picture language and that every letter had meanings attached to them and numerical values also. And one of the letters in there was the Hebrew letter TAV. It's the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the 22nd letter of the alphabet. And today you'll see the Hebrew written like the top symbol you see here at the top. That's the modern Hebrew letter Tav. But below that you'll see a Hebrew letter Tav, and that's how they would have written the Tav at the time of Ezekiel. It looked more like an X. Here, the earliest Paleo-Hebrew Tav looked exactly like a Christian cross, the cross upon which Jesus was crucified. The second iteration in what they call Middle Hebrew looks more like an X. As the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet, it represented the sealing of a covenant or the finishing or the seriousness of signing your signature to something. But it represented a finishing of a covenant. So in the following year, when I saw this in early of 2017, this really caught my attention. And I didn't see anybody else talking about this. So I kind of kept it to myself, and I studied this and looked at when it would happen. And an extremely rare eclipse was set to pass over the United States from Oregon down to South Carolina, from the upper left of this image to the lower right in September 21st of 2017. The second extremely rare eclipse would pass from the lower left to the upper right on April the 8th of 2024, which at that time was 7 years in the future. So this caught my attention. I studied this, I looked at it, I looked at what was on the left there at Salem, Oregon, near Portland. To the lower right, it crosses Charleston, South Carolina. I thought that's an interesting, that it would cross the starting place of the American Civil War. And I looked to the lower left where it comes into the United States over Texas, and it passes the center there near Carbondale, Illinois, and passes on out through the northeast, exiting over the state of Maine. And it caught my attention because there was a verse in the Bible in Ezekiel 9 where we're told, "And the Lord said unto him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof." The word mark is the Hebrew letter Tav. Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a Tav upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. So the Tav was a mark on those who were sad and heartbroken for the sin of the nation. And I thought, well, that's interesting. If God marks and judges people, does he mark and judge towns? Yes, several towns like Benjamin of Gibeah were judged in the Bible. Does he mark tribes? Yes. The tribe of Benjamin was heavily judged one time for protecting people who had assaulted and killed an innocent woman. Does the Lord judge large cities? Yes. Samaria was judged for sin. Jerusalem was judged. Does the Lord judge nations? Yes, he judges Israel. He judged Babylon. He judged Assyria. You can look all through the Bible and see where God judges individuals, towns, cities, tribes, and nations, and ultimately the world. So that caught my attention. And I thought, if the God who set the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky for signs and seasons, like it says in Genesis, if he was judging a country, how would he let them know? So the time came in 2017, and I still have the glasses that we wore when I filmed this video. This is the first time I've put them on since then. They're to keep your eyes safe while you're looking at the sun. And I knew that this was a momentous event. I just wasn't exactly sure why. So I wanted to put it on video, and you're about to see that.
Today we're experiencing something that hasn't been experienced in this country since children rode horse and buggies to school, since the Wright brothers were creating their first airplane. My grandmother used to ride a buckboard wagon driven by her father to a high school that only went through the 8th grade. Since the last time this has happened, total solar eclipse that only covered the United States, we have gone from the horse and buggy age to the microchips implanted in human brain age. We are watching humans flying in spaceships. We can get on a telephone. A 12-year-old can get on a telephone and call anywhere on the planet. This has been the most critical time of change in all of world history. And it is my belief that God is marking our country to draw our minds to this specific time in history. In front of me, I have a crudely drawn map of the USA. Yes, I want to make America great again by bringing them the truth. Central to our Christian belief is the mark of the cross. Or in Hebrew lettering, we call it the mark of the TAV. Paleo-Hebrew, the TAV is similar to an X or a sign of the cross. It means to seal or to covenant. Today, we have a total solar eclipse beginning, crossing the United States, beginning here, and crossing all the way to here. Right now, I'm here. We're in Gallinsville, South Carolina, at the intersection of Highway 11 and Highway 14, the parking lot of this fine church, to come experience this once-in-a-lifetime event. Why is this so significant? God is drawing the sign of the TAV across the United States to draw our attention to this most important point in American history. Here we have the TAV, the mark begin. And we ask, well, what is that? That's not a TAV. 7 years, from 2017 until 2024, we have 7 years, a period of testing, a period of God's testing and God's completion over the United States. Because in 2024, 7 years from today, the TAV sign will be completed over the United States. When the next eclipse passes southwest to northeast across the United States, beginning down near Texas and traveling up through the northeastern corridor. This will complete the most important time of testing of God's miraculous presence and deliverance over this country. And we are here today to witness this event where the sun is just about at the point of what we're in the path of totality. It's just about to be darkened out by the moon. This is a tremendously significant event, and I consider it an honor to be able to bring this simple but important message to the listeners. Again, this is Sam.
So, in hindsight, we have to ask a question. Has America and the church been severely tested during the past 7 years? Yeah, I would say so. We have gone through more testing as a nation and as a church, as a Seventh-day Adventist church, than we have in a very, very, very long time. It's the only time, to my knowledge, that every Seventh-day Adventist church in North America was shut down. I think that's extremely significant. And I don't have to tell you of the difficulties that we went through as a church in the past 7 years. So it begs a question. If God is judging us as a nation or as a church, what sins would draw this type of national judgment? Because America has been filled with sinners from its founding. But what type of sins would rise to the level of national judgment against such a great and powerful country as the United States? This is by no means a list of all, but it's some that stuck out in my mind. And again, we had to be made aware of these things for the past 7 years so that we could make a decision about them. Remember, the TAV Mark is when the Lord is marking those who are grieved in their heart for the sin of the nation. This picture crystallizes the assault upon our children. This picture, more than any other that I could find, focuses in and gives an expression to the attack that has been waged upon the children of the United States of America. This was taken in October of 2017, less than 30 days after the passing of the first portion of the TAV Mark in Long Beach, California at the Michelle Obama Neighborhood Library. I don't understand how mothers would take their children and place them in front of a man dressed as a female demon creature to be read and to be entertained by this. And I don't understand a school teacher, a librarian, a public employee that would in good conscience do this to children. But that one photograph encapsulates the attack upon the children of America. All across America for the last 7 years, we have seen this attack. It is very sad that they take the symbol of God's mercy and turn it into a banner for the very sins that brought down the wrath of God in the past. What other sins will draw down the wrath of God? Well, what drew them down in the Bible? Let's look to the Bible. In 2017, when the TAV Mark passed from Oregon to South Carolina, it passed over one city in particular, Nashville, Tennessee. Well, why should that draw your attention? Well, this temple to the goddess Diana, or Athena to the Romans, Diana to the Greeks. This is in Nashville, Tennessee. And inside this full-scale building is the highest statue in the United States, 42 feet tall. If you read Acts chapter 19, you'll hear about Diana of the Ephesians. I'll call this one the Diana of the Laodiceans, because it appears that Christians have gone totally asleep. And why would this in particular bring down the judgment of God onto a city like Nashville? Because they know better. There are Bible colleges all around Nashville. Everywhere you go, there's Bibles, there's churches. Go to Nashville, Tennessee, and see it for yourself. There are churches all over Nashville. They've had access to the Word of God for several hundred years. You can go in a dollar store in Nashville and get a Bible for $5. There are Bibles everywhere in Nashville. They should have known better. Why do we as a nation have a 42-foot high statue of the goddess Athena, or also called Diana. These are sins that will bring down judgment of God upon a nation. So does God give warnings prior to judgment? Yes. Genesis 1, he warned Adam and Eve to avoid the tree. Genesis 6, he warned Noah and his family and the world around them to survive the flood by getting on the ark. Genesis 19, God sent angels to warn Lot and his family to leave Sodom before the destruction. In the book of Jonah, God sent warning to the city of Nineveh to avert the punishment. And all through the four Gospels, you have warning to the temple, you have a warning to Jerusalem, you have a warning to Israel, and you have a warning to the larger world. All through the New Testament, there are warnings to the church. God always gives warning before judgment. What type of judgment could this entail? Well, as I saw this map back in 2017, something struck my attention. The first natural disaster in the USA that I saw linked to this TAV Mark was Hurricane Harvey. And here's how I noticed it. I saw this from the Weather Survey Bureau. Look where Hurricane Harvey began before it came and struck Houston. Now, look where it began. Look at this map of where the TAV Mark ended on August 21st of 2017, going from the upper left to the bottom right. The TAV Mark ended, the hurricane began, and it took 3 days for it to strike mainland United States. How would God judge a nation? How would God punish national sin? Well, he might judge it like that. Like that and like that. To pull people's attention away from the trash of this world and remind them that there are issues of life and death occurring around us. So the next question I thought, as I looked at the four corners of the TAV Mark, is, well, what's at the center related to a possible national disaster? What's right at the center of this TAV Mark? I noticed this, the New Madrid fault line. Those little red dots are recorded earthquakes. Here's another image showing essentially the same material. There's another image. That is at the exact center of the TAV Mark. The exact center. The two marks come together and draw our attention to the most powerful earthquake that ever struck the United States. On December 16th, 1811, and that should draw our attention, especially as Adventists. That was 7 years before William Miller discovered the truth of the 2300 days in the Bible. Exactly 7 years before William Miller's discovery regarding the 2300 days, the most powerful earthquake to ever hit the United States hit at the center of this TAV Mark. A 7.2 to an 8.2 Richter scale magnitude hit at the center of that TAV Mark. It made the earth roll. It caused the Mississippi River to flow backwards. It rang the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, over 1,000 miles away. It was strongly felt for 200 miles in all directions. The most powerful earthquake to ever strike the United States. These are drawings of the time recounting what happened. You'll see waves of water crashing away houses and trees and people struggling on the wreckage trying to survive. There's a drawing of the Mississippi River after the wreckage and a steamboat's trying to make its way through all the garbage. You'll see a crashed steamboat there in the forefront of this picture. You'll see little images, I don't know if you can see them, but they're running around with their hands up in the air like they're crying out to heaven. You see lightning flashing and the earth rolling and water flowing and houses tumbling down. They thought it was the end of the world, but it wasn't a heavily populated area, so thousands and thousands of people didn't die then in 1811. But if that same earthquake occurred today, it would devastate multiple major cities and kill untold thousands of people. So let me ask you a question. Whenever somebody's investigating a situation, they want to know the who, what, where, why, and when. Does this image tell you the who, what, where, why, and when? Well, who? Yes, only Jehovah God, who created the earth, the sun, and the moon, and the stars, could accomplish something like this because only He controls the movement of the sun and the moon. Does it tell you who would be judged? Yes, obviously the United States. Does it tell you what? Yes, national judgment, the TAV, the finishing of a covenant to see who's grieved for the sins of a nation. Does it tell you why? Yes, in the TAV, if you look at Ezekiel 9, you see that God was judging the sin of Israel. Does it tell you when? Well, it does. August the 21st of 2017 until April the 8th of 2024, when it's that the river that ran through the middle of Babylon dried up. The river running through the middle of Babylon dried up, and that's when Babylon collapsed. So I thought, well, maybe this is just a coincidence. Let me look at it. And I noticed that the river that runs right through the middle of the United States crosses precisely over where the TAV Mark intersects. You'll remember that Jay and Andrews identified Babylon as apostate Protestantism. If there's one Protestant country in the world more prominent than any other, it's the United States. When the United States becomes apostate Protestant, it becomes Babylon. And this river runs through the center of Babylon. Let's jump up to the year 2020. I had been studying this TAV Mark for a while, and I just felt impressed to share it with people. When you tell people about something that's maybe 3 or 4 or 7 years in the future, really, people don't want to care. They don't want to hear it. Nobody wants to hear it. They want to hear what's coming this week. They want to hear what's coming next month, but they don't care what's coming in 7 years. So I'm going to take you back to a warning that was given right here on August the 15th of 2020. August the 15th of 2020. As I explained this TAV Mark and the warning and the danger, the potential danger it represented to the United States regarding national judgment. So these next slides are the slides that I shared during the Sabbath school. I talked about what is chiastic structure. Chi is the Greek letter X. Hebrew Tav is shaped like an X. The Greek letter Chi is shaped just like an X, and that's why Bible scholars use it. That's why they call it chiastic structure. And it's designed to emphasize the thing at the center. Chiastic structure is symmetrical. It emphasizes the thing at the center. Here's one Bible verse out of a great many that show a chiastic structure. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship Him. God is a spirit. They that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and truth. Do you see how that's symmetrical? Right in the middle. God the Father seeks such to worship Him. God is a spirit. And then on either side it says, true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth. It's symmetrical. It has a chiastic structure. So we looked at the Hebrew alphabet. And this is a modernized alphabet. This is not the Paleo-Hebrew, but it's a modern Hebrew alphabet with the number values attached. This is not numerology. This is a very old system of reckoning Hebrew. Whenever they were writing a number, they would use these letters to write the number. And if you look at the very last letter of the alphabet, the Hebrew letter Tav, it has a number value of 400. Please remember that, 400. So we looked at the early Hebrew, the middle Hebrew, about the time of Ezekiel, where it looks like an X. That's the second one from the left. You've seen this before. Here's Ezekiel 9. The Lord said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem. Set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. And to the others he said in mine hearing, go ye after him through the city and smite. Let not your eyes spare, neither have pity. Slay utterly old, both young, both maids and little children and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. Now, this is not the mark of the beast. Please see that. This is a separate mark. It's a mark on the forehead of a Tav to mark who was sad for the sins of the nation. I explained on August the 15th of 2020, I explained all of the same pictures that we've just seen, and I showed this picture as it relates to national judgment. There was one period in our history, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was actually formalized as an official church right in the middle of this war in 1863. This stretched from 1861 to 1865. Look at that TAV mark on the flag to your left. It's almost like God was, one of 100,000 ways, was making the United States aware that it was under national judgment. Why was it under national judgment? Well, for its many sins. These are the years that began and ended the Civil War. And at the time, back in August of 2020, I did note that it was 22 years before 1888. That was significant to something else we had been talking about in church at that time. But I wanted to emphasize this TAV mark over the United States during a time of national judgment. The TAV marks are 2,422 days apart. And so I noticed the geographical center, but then I wanted to look at the time center. If you go forward from August 21st of 2017, it leads you to December the 14th of 2020. If you go backward from April the 8th of 2024, it leads back to December the 15th of 2020. That's the center. And according to chiastic structure, the most important thing always is emphasized at the center. So I saw the geographical center, but now I was concerned with the time center. Not the geographical center, the time center. And this is a presentation. You can see it on YouTube. It's under the title, The TAV Mark, of December 14th to 15th, 2020. So we're just going to play a little clip. Now, this was 4 months before the time center that would occur in December 14th and 15th of 2020. And you can see now the little bit from that Sabbath school. This is just a couple minutes from that Sabbath school. There were 100 people there that heard it. Hopefully some people still remember that. And then 3 years ago, down in Gallinsville, filming it on video with my son, I put it on video because I said, people won't hardly believe this if I don't put it on video. I would share the video here, but it's about 10 minutes long. So I put it on video that I thought this was a time of testing of the United States. And I said, I think we're going to go through a serious time of testing like we've never had in this country. But then who do you go share that with? Nobody wants to hear about stuff, occurring 3, 4. Oh, how I wish I could have gotten up in front of the church in August of 2017 and compelled and implored the church and said, this country is going through a time of testing like you won't believe, buddy. Because from 2017 to today, it's been a wild ride. It's been a strange experience. And as I thought about that, I said, yeah, I know people are going to think it's weird. There's nothing more irritating than date setters. They irritate me. So I'm not setting a date. I don't even claim to tell you what's going to happen on that date. I'm just telling you that the creation which our Lord has made, by the process of that creation, the sun and the moon, which he set in the sky for signs for seasons, is leaving a TAV mark across the United States. And based on the chiastic structure of the Bible that we see repeated over and over again, the most important event always happens right in the middle, like Christ on the cross, in the middle of human history. Not the beginning, not the end, in the middle. I would keep my eyes on December the 14th and 15th of this year. Because if I'm wrong, it's just something else for people to just say, oh, that was interesting, but man, he was way off. I pray to God I'm way off.
I hope we have 200 more years. If the Lord had come back in 1888, do you know the population of this world was 1 billion? The whole world. Do you know the population of the world now is over 8 billion? By delaying his return, 7 billion additional souls were given an opportunity to enter his kingdom. Now, if that's not mercy, I don't know what is.
So, 4 months ahead of time, we were drawing attention to 12/14 and 12/15 of 2020. What actually happened on those dates? For some, it passed without notice. But for some, two extremely important events happened on that date. But before I get to touch on that, let me remind the church of something. Alonzo Jones argued before Senator Blair in the U.S. Senate in December of 1888. His argument was essentially this, that the first and foremost founding principle of the United States is individual liberty and freedom of conscience, meaning the government cannot tell you how to believe. Everything else is secondary, and that one defining principle is the only thing that truly ever made America great and distinguished America from all the other nations of the world. Now, ask yourself this. How do ordinary individual citizens express their conscience within the framework of the American governmental system? It's called the vote. So, if an election of great magnitude and great importance was stolen intentionally by a coordinated effort within the government, that would be the very definition of the United States turning against its one core, most important founding principle. Now, whether you believe it was or not, you'd have to ask yourself the question. If it wasn't stolen, then politics as usual. But if it was stolen, that was a rare event indeed. And it should draw our mind to something Ellen White wrote in Testimonies for the Church. When our country shall repudiate every principle of its Constitution as a Protestant and Republican government, and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan and that the end is near. Do you see what she said? When the United States turns against every principle of its Constitution as a Protestant and Republican government and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods. Well, what is the core founding principle of our Protestant and Republican government? Freedom of conscience, as expressed in the vote. Her warning was extremely severe. She said, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan and that the end is near. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 451. Well, many of us remember the election of November of 2020. I won't cover it a lot except to touch on it and remind you that the election wasn't finished on November the 6th. That was just the beginning. It was finished and finalized when the Electoral College came together to essentially seal the deal and certify the vote of the electors. And that happened on 12/14 of 2020. Multiple news articles, they're all kind of the same. They all happened on 12/14/2020. Biden's 306 Electoral College vote makes his victory official. Electoral College affirms Biden win. Now, I'm not trying to take sides between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I'm just trying to lay out something that appears Ellen White warned us of over 150 years ago. What else happened on 12/14 of 2020? The same day. What else happened, like I said in that Sabbath school 4 months prior, that would rip the country apart? So on the same day, the Electoral College certified what a great many people contend was a massively stolen election. And on that same day, the first COVID-19 vaccines were rolled out in the United States. What follows is just an accounting. The first U.S. COVID vaccination outside of the clinical trials began on Monday, kicking off the most urgent mass immunization campaign. A nurse in New York was among the first to receive the shot. A historic day, the first COVID-19 vaccines. They hit the East Coast first, and then they went to the West Coast on December 15th. First doses of Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine arrived in Santa Clara County, California. And if you squint your eyes and look at the date of that article, it's December the 15th of 2020. What does that got to do with anything? Well, I try to see the world through a Bible lens. And recently this word was brought to my attention, nashak, from the Strong's Hebrew, number 5391. Strong's Hebrew Concordance. That's the official method for English speakers to study Bible words. What does nashak mean? It's a verb. It means bite, especially of snakes. This is what hit the Israelites when they were in the desert and the fiery serpents began to bite them. If you study that passage in the Hebrew, the snakes were nashaking them. Nashak. So what does that word mean? A bite, especially of a snake. But if you break out of Strong's Hebrew Concordance, you'll find a second meaning to this word also. Primitive root, to strike with a sting as a serpent, but figuratively to oppress with interest on a loan, to bite, or to lend upon usury. Nashak has a dual meaning: the bite of a serpent and the oppression of debt or usury. So it's a bite of a serpent linked with economic oppression. Make of it what you will. Here's what I was looking at. If the events at the crossing of the time center of the TAV Mark from 12/14/2020 until January 6, 2021, if those were a small pattern, a tiny little architectural model of God's warning of what's coming, that was a small pattern of larger events to come, we should expect a larger repeat pattern of the events after the geographical crossing on 4/8 of 24. So, what's happening after 4/8/24? That's the real question, because that's in, 3 weeks? Based on this pattern, this is not prophetic. This is based on a pattern of just analyzing the events that we've seen. It appears a more forceful repudiation of our Protestant Republican form of constitutional government, followed closely by a nashak, and then followed 23 weeks later by a magnified January 6th type event that further revealed the marvelous working of Satan in the United States. Based on this pattern, that's what I would be on the lookout for. I think it's time the church needs to pull our head out of the world and begin to pray and follow the Lamb wherever He goes. What else is God judging our country for? 1831 to 2024, light followed, light rejected. I haven't heard anybody else talk about this, so this is breaking ground in new territory. 2 years ago, I was in West Frankfort, Illinois, with, there he is, Terry Marshall, a good friend. He used to attend this church about 30 years ago. We were I found myself right at the center of the TAV Mark, visiting the 3ABN church. You're familiar with 3ABN. Broadcast the Adventist message. The truth of the second coming of Christ, warnings, good preaching, good Bible doctrine, truth, going out in, it's either 9 or 12 languages, 24 hours a day. When I was allowed to visit just the inside of the broadcasting room, I took this picture of the screens. I thought it's just amazing. The Advent message is leaving out of West Frankfort, Illinois, going to all the world in multiple languages. Why is that significant in this presentation? Well, you should go back and look at a documentary about Danny Shelton and the founding of the Three Angels Broadcasting Network and learn the story of how God led him directly to that location. It's an amazing story, but that's the original satellite from 3ABN. And it's right there in the center. You'll see where those two red lines cross. That's the exact mathematical center of the two eclipse marks. And then if you leave the center and follow that red line toward the upper right, just a few miles, you're going to see West Frankfort. That's where 3ABN is located. The Advent message is being broadcasted to the entire world from the center of the TAV Mark. That's fascinating. Well, what other significant places are being highlighted by this event coming up in April the 8th, here in about 3 weeks? As I looked at this, I noticed something in particular. It crossed over the most significant hallmarks, the most significant foundational events regarding the Advent people and the Advent message that began in 1818 with Miller's study, and then in 1831 he gave his first public sermon in Dresden Village in Washington County, New York. Lowhampton, New York, Miller's home. Port Gibson, New York. That's the Hiram Edson Farm. What is the Hiram Edson Farm? Well, it's called the theological birthplace of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's where the people the Advent people met with the Sabbatarians, and they also met with those who were studying the truth about Christ and His work in the sanctuary, and they came together in Port Gibson, New York, in Hiram Edson's barn for a series of meetings. And they finalized and hammered out and studied out, and they prayed, and that is called the theological birthplace of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, Rochester, New York, that's the first ever Adventist-owned printing press in 1852. Before that, there was no great movement to put the message out in printing, and even if it was printed, it was on somebody else's printer. The very first Adventist-owned printing press is going to be crossed over by this TAV Mark in Rochester, New York. Cincinnati, Ohio, that's the first printing of O.R.L. Crozier's Day Star explaining how they found Christ in the heavenly sanctuary in March of 1845. And it also crosses over the city where the three elders of the church came together and formalized the name Seventh-day Adventist in 1863. Let's go back and look at this line. What you're seeing is the final shadow of the TAV Mark enters in the lower left. It crosses Eagle Pass, Texas, which you'd have to not be paying attention to the current events to have missed Eagle Pass. Eagle Pass is the center of a human agony right now. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people from China, the Middle East, Central and South America are coming across the U.S. border right there at Eagle Pass. As it goes up, it passes through Jonah, Texas, and then it passes through two towns called Nineveh, and it crosses directly over 3ABN, and then it crosses over these historical sites. The final TAV Mark traces the history of the Advent movement. Well, as you're looking at it this way, it traces the history of the Advent movement. And then it leaves the country in Maine, and I would have to be here all day to explain the importance of Maine in the history of the Advent movement. Sister White's birthplace, Jay and Andrews read T.M. Preble's tract on the Sabbath there in Maine. The teenagers who devoted their life to the Advent movement came out of Maine. So you have all of these events. It's like God is reminding us of where it began, where it traveled through, and where it finally concluded. 1831 to 2024. The Advent message of William Miller, one of the peaks of the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. It was the only time in history that America got ready for the return of Jesus Christ. America has been given more light than any other country in history, and it's sad to me that we have, to a large extent, rejected the light of the Adventist movement that began in Maine and stretched all the way down to West Frankfort, Illinois, and is currently being broadcast out to the earth in a dozen languages. Light followed, light rejected. And if you honestly look at it, can you say the United States as a whole has followed the light given them by God? I would say we haven't. 400. You remember the TAV Mark had a numerical value of 400. What's that got to do with anything? 400 what? That's the question. Well, let me run this by you. 400 years of Protestant Republican government, of the people, by the people, and for the people, from November 1620 to December of 2020. 400 years. What was going on in November of 1620? The Mayflower Compact. Let me give you a little bit of the story so you can understand it. In 1607, Jamestown, Virginia was established when John Smith got off the ship, planted a cross, and dedicated this continent to Jesus Christ. He was doing that with funding and support from the English royalty. He was doing it on behalf of English royalty. Jamestown, Virginia was under the rulership of the English monarchy, and in 1620, an English ship filled with Puritans was headed for Jamestown. But they got blown off course and ended up in Plymouth, way outside the jurisdiction of the English monarchy. They needed to get off the ship. They were way outside the English monarchy. So before they disembarked the ship, the leaders got together and they created and signed the Mayflower Compact. This was the original compact agreement by Protestant. Now, Republican, you got to understand that Republican means a system of unchanging laws. So if you don't want something to change, you write it down. So what they created was a Republican form of government, meaning they wrote it down so that it would not change. And this original compact agreement was the first Protestant Republican system of government in America, of the people, by the people, and for the people. We've had 400 years exactly from 1620 until the 2020 election. Now, here we are in the Triune Seventh Adventist Church. For members of this church, that's a familiar sight. Nancy Hornbeck, God bless her. She's passed away now. She's awaiting the resurrection. She's asleep in Jesus. She was one of the original Triune Seventh Adventist church members. As one of the founders who helped build this church, she went to Georgia and met with an artist and created this stained glass image that you see right here above my head. It was installed here at Trine in September of 1974. This September, that will have been exactly 50 years that this image has been hanging right here above the pulpit in our church. It's a beautiful image. Let me tell you something. In spring of 2021, our church, like many other churches, was going through a little bit of turbulence. And I had came in that day, And our pastor was announcing that he was moving to another church and would be leaving us. And some people were upset by that. I didn't want to see him go. But life has its bumps and bruises. You roll with the punches and keep going. And in spring of 2021, I walked into church. Now, this story is not about me, but I'm part of it. And I'll just tell you something that I saw. I walked in through the hallway, up the stairs, into the balcony, and I saw that. And as I looked at it, just the clearest voice came to my head, not an audible sound in the ear. I'll call it, I don't know what to call it, a wireless transmission. 3.5 years after the trump, the law becomes Romanized, the sinking ground indicates the time has run out, the angel touches the ground, and the TAV Mark leads to the foot of the cross. I was shaken when I saw that. It took me a long time to look at that and stare at that and ask God to make sure I wasn't seeing just something of my imagination. Look on the ground at that X-shaped shadow. That would catch your attention immediately. Sometimes when you look at something for 49 or 50 years, it just becomes commonplace and you don't really stop to pay attention. It just becomes part of the architecture. But the people who founded this church loved Jesus, and they were trying to bring light into this county. And I believe that God was there when she met with that artist to create this image. Let's walk through this. You see the image now? Keep it in your memory. 3.5 years after the trump, the law becomes Romanized. Now, why do I say Romanized? I had to think about that. Remember the 10 Commandments. They're written in Hebrew on tables of stone by the finger of God. They were not written in Roman numerals. Roman numerals. And it's funny that Adventists of all people should have caught that. Why is anything Roman being put on the law of God? But I think it was God's just outrageous and expansive sense of humor that always leads us to lift up our eyes and consider Him and consider His Word. So it made sense. Roman numerals. The law becomes Romanized. The sinking ground indicates the time has run out. And I thought to myself, what sinking ground? I don't know. New Madrid fault line, the most powerful earthquake that's overdue for an earthquake, the most powerful earthquake to ever hit the United States that made the ground roll. It made the Mississippi flow backwards for like 2 days. It shook the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia 1,000 miles away. Just a guess. The angel touches the ground. You know something interesting? MAGA. There's a movement that's been pushed across our country. MAGA. Those letters will be real familiar to you if you're in the United States. It's Hebrew for touch. Maga means touch. Maga movement. The angel touches the ground. The TAV mark. Now when it's highlighted, do you see it? Do you see it plainly? This broad X-shaped shadow covering the land? And even if you follow, like the path of the eclipse, from the upper left to the lower right, then from the lower left to the upper right, it leads you directly to the foot of the cross. Let me ask you this. How were the Hebrews healed after they were being bitten by snakes? What did God do? He told Moses, take a pole, create a brass serpent, put it on the pole, and anybody who fixes his gaze on that will be healed. And then in John 3, Jesus comes back and tells us, if you want to understand the cross, look at the serpent on the pole that Moses lifted up. He said, if I be lifted up, will draw all men to me. I think it's interesting that the conclusion of these events, patterned in this stained glass 50-year-old window, draw the attention directly to the foot of the cross, which is exactly where our gaze needs to be. So that was pretty heavy. I didn't tell anybody about that for a while. I thought about it and considered it, and I told somebody close to me, and I said, it seems to me like this TAV Mark, maybe it's a message that's meant to come out of this church. July 29th of 2023, I wrote it down on the church bulletin because it struck me as so significant. I had looked at it for a while and considered and asked, said, Lord, is there something you're showing us here that I'm missing? And this clearly caught my attention. What numbers is the angel pointing to? Right? Number 4, IV. Okay, the angel's got 2 hands. What other numbers is he pointing to? 7 and 8. Yes. There's one line between 2 of the numbers. Of 10 numbers on these tables, there's one line in the image between only 2 of the numbers. Which numbers? The 7 and the 8. Do you see it? 4, 7, and 8. And as I considered this, and I thought, that's pretty interesting. A line, almost like a shadow, like a mark. 4, 7, and 8. So I'll convert them into our numerals so it makes a little more sense. You don't have to add up the V and the I anymore for it to make sense. 4, 7, and 8. That's how it's written in this image. It's right here in front of you. So I added this up and I thought, wow, 4 plus 8 equals 12, and 7 plus 8 equals 12, 15. Where have we heard 12, 15 at before? It's pointing to the chiastic midpoint of the TAV Mark, the time center of the TAV Mark. From August 21st of 2017, then from April the 8th of 2024, backwards, the time center is December 14th and 15th of 2020. 12:15. So I said, no way, this is a coincidence. This is nuts. Does God have a sense of humor this broad? Let me ask you this. 50 years ago, when Nancy Hornbeck was creating this image and praying to God for wisdom and guidance, did God see 50 years into the future? Yes. He sees the past, present, and the future simultaneously. 4/7. 4/7/2024. Well, that's the last day before the mark crosses, before the TAV is completed. After the line, it changes. 4/8/2024. Now, if you believe that's just a coincidence, those are fantastic odds. You should go to Las Vegas and become a millionaire gambling if you believe in that kind of luck. I don't think this is luck. I think God, who orders all things and sees the past, present, and the future simultaneously, used part of his creation to send a message. The angel is pointing to the midpoint, the chiastic center of the TAV Mark, and pointing to the end date of the TAV Mark. That's amazing. That's when it's complete of the United States. Well, what do? According to my own estimation, these events warn us of momentous events directly in front of us, and we need to keep our eyes firmly fixed on Jesus. Now, who's this cute little guy? Stick with me. We got about 5 more minutes. This is my son, John. He's a cute boy. This is him in late 2002. One of his favorite games. Now, I'm going to tell you something that's so almost unbelievable that if I don't lay a background story, you're not going to believe me telling you this. I have to lay the background story in order for it to make sense. And once it makes sense to you, then you're going to see I'm telling you the truth. I was the only witness to this, but as Jesus Christ is my holy witness as I stand here in front of you in this church, I'm telling you the truth to the best of my ability. My son, John, he had a game he used to love to play. He wanted me to stack up blocks in a tower about as high up as his head. And he would wait, and he would wait, and oh, the anticipation was almost too much at times. But he would wait until I'd stacked up the tower all the way to the top. And he wanted to kick that tower so badly. That was what his goal. He wanted to kick that little tower of blocks. So being a new Christian, had just become a Christian 2 years before this. Being a new Christian, I wanted to set a good example for my son, draw his mind to the words of God, and cement Bible verses into his little 2-year-old mind. So I would read this verse. I would say, okay, John, you gotta memorize your Bible verse before you can kick down the blocks. You got to repeat the verse. And I read it one time, and it says, it's Revelation 18:21, and mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it in the sea, saying, thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And I would read the words with him and show him, and he would say, thus with great violence shall Babylon the great be thrown down, and boom, he would kick the blocks down and just smash it down. And I don't know how many hundreds of times we did that same game, and every time it was the same. Every time it was the same. The tower would be stacked up, and he would say, thus with great violence shall Babylon the Great be thrown down. And boom, sometimes he would smash it down from the top or kick it with his feet. He had a lot of different ways he liked to smash down the tower, but he would always say the same verse. It was so cute. Boom, 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 down it goes, not one stone left upon another. Now, why am I telling you this story? Well, around that same time, I've had read many Christian books, but I used to work for emergency response in Edgefield County, South Carolina. And so as part of that job, I got called into this house with this man. He was having some kind of argument with his drunken son, and the drunken son had left. But this guy was a really decent man. And as I was standing inside of his house, I looked over to my left, and he had a huge wall, a library of Christian books. And being a brand new Christian, I was interested, and I walked over and looked. I wish I remembered this man's name now, but I don't. And I looked at this wall, and I said, that's an impressive library of books you got there, sir. And he walked over right in front of me and pulled out a book. He says, you know what? Take this book. He said, once you read this book, your life will never be the same. And I thought, well, that's a challenge. I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll take this book and read it. And the book was called What Demons Can Do to Saints by Merrill Unger. Now, that sounds like a creepy title, but the book was all about spiritual warfare and how Christians need to brace themselves against demonic delusion, and how that we need to essentially put on the armor of God in order to be effective Christians. And one thing that Unger stressed throughout his entire book was that Christians need to get rid of pagan objects and satanic objects and things that are evil. Videotapes, posters, books, objects. I had an Indian, a Native American medicine bag that had been given to me by a roommate one time, and he said, you need to cut it open and burn the cedar and the doja root. It'll give you, if you're ever lost, it'll give you dreams to find your way. Well, I had that, and I had a voodoo chicken foot that I had bought in New Orleans just as a tourist gag. I thought it was interesting. I wasn't a Christian, non-Christians do some crazy stuff. So out went the voodoo chicken foot, burned it. Out went the doja root, buried that. Out went all these things that I had collected up in my life as a non-Christian, and I got rid of them out of the house. And Unger was always stressing the importance of rebuking this stuff in the name of Jesus and claiming the blood of Christ over your life and shutting the door to demonic influence and verbally saying it. To let them know that they're not welcome in your life anymore. And he was right. That man was right. My life never was the same after I read this book. God had me on a trajectory trying to clean me up from the world, and this is just one of hundreds of books that have impacted, that the Lord has used to impact my life. But now, like I said, this story is not about me, but why am I telling you this? Okay, so in fall of 2008, my good little son that you saw, he was 7 years old by this time, and there was not an Adventist church anywhere near Edgefield County, South Carolina, nor an Adventist church school. And my son had been homeschooled, so I really believed, going into the third grade, it was necessary for him to be in a church school, and I really felt like that was important. And at the time, my parents had retired and had moved out to Missouri, Doniphan, Missouri, of all places. I had never set foot there, neither had they. They went to work at Nasoka Pines as missionaries for a couple of years and then bought a piece of property in Doniphan, Missouri. Nobody in our family had ever been out to Missouri before that. So they helped the Doniphan and the Poplar Bluff Church, Poplar Bluff, Missouri, they helped them reopen a church school that had been closed because they were retired teachers. So this was a big deal for them. The church was happy. The conference there actually made a video about it. And I thought, they said, why don't you send your son out here? He could stay with us and attend church school. And the kids out here, it's a really good group of kids, a really positive, kind of a low-stress environment. And so this is the only picture I have of that trip from 2008, this was in the late summer, probably August of 2008, driving my son John out to Doniphan, Missouri, where he would start church school. In the caption, I'll read it to you. Late summer 2008, yes, it's 1,000 degrees. It was hot. Yes, that's a wood stove strapped to the roof of a 2002 Kia Rio. Yeah, I had a wood stove duct taped up there on some padding. My parents needed a stove, and I had one, and so I said, I'll bring it to you. We taped it on the roof and took off. Yes, we're traveling 700 miles like that with no air conditioning. Yes, that's the best 7-year-old in the world grinning in the back seat. You can see he's back there peeking at you out from under that little piano keyboard. And we rode to Doniphan, Missouri, just like that, in August of 2008. So I'm telling you this to explain why I ended up in Doniphan, Missouri in fall of 2008. September 2008, Doniphan, Missouri, I was traveling back to Edgefield, South Carolina, 685 miles by Google Maps. However, at that time, there was no Google Maps for me to use. This is a modern map. I took the shortest route when I returned back from Doniphan to Edgefield, South Carolina. And I took this exact same route you see here highlighted. Along the route, now, let me tell you something. While I was out there, I'll go back. While I was out there, my parents had moved all their stuff, and they had some family stuff in an outbuilding there stored up, and a lot of it was old, things sometimes that are 20 or 30 years old. And they had one thing in particular that struck my attention when I went out there. It was a stone concrete demon about this high with the body of a person with little clawed feet and the head of like a vicious, snarling canine with pointy ears. And it looked like maybe a medieval gargoyle, but they had used it as a doorstop. Well, having read Merrill Unger's book and been on the warpath against all these, wicked objects, I said, I'm getting rid of that thing. But it was like this concrete stone, and it was this big, and it was probably weighed 40 pounds, if not more. And I said, well, I can't burn it. And I said, if I bust it up with, I don't have a sledgehammer, what am I going to do with this thing? And I'm leaving out. I think, I'm not leaving this here. In the name of Jesus, I'm getting rid of this wicked influence out of my family. I stuck it in the front floorboard of that Kia Rio, headed back to Edgefield, South Carolina. And as I traveled, I took this route. And along that route, when you come to the intersection of Missouri, Illinois, and Kentucky, you're on Interstate 57. And it was about 10, maybe 11:30 at night by this time. I had waited for my son to go to sleep before I left on this 10 or 11 hour drive. And I come up to this area. I'm crossing the Interstate 57 crossing where it goes over the Mississippi River. Right there in the center, you can see the straight part going from the lower left to the upper right, and it crosses the Mississippi River. And I stopped. This is dead of night. There wasn't another soul around, no cars coming either direction. And I stopped right in the middle of that bridge. Now, on the drive from Donovan to this bridge, I was so sad at leaving my son. And I hated how life can twist you, and it seems like the enemy just gets a foothold and wrecks your life. And I was so angry with the works of the enemy and how devils had damaged my life. And I wanted to live for Jesus, and I wanted to be free and clear to live for Jesus. And the more I thought about this, as I'm approaching this bridge, I said, I'm going to throw this concrete stone demon statue off of that big bridge I passed as I was coming in. So here I am leaving Donovan, driving in the dark, and I stop in the middle of this bridge. And I was so angry by that point, I just stopped right in the middle of the road, right in the lane. I didn't even pull over. I stopped right in the middle of the road. I got out, went around to the passenger side, opened the door, got that concrete stone demon, and as I just grab it and I'm flinging it over the rail, the only thing I could think of in my mind as I shouted was, "Thus with great violence shall Babylon the Great be thrown down." And I heaved it over the rail as I shouted that and looked down, and it was still tumbling. And I said, "And be thou removed and be thou cast into the sea." And sploosh, it went into the water way down below. I felt like I was rid of it. I said, "Lord Jesus, protect me from that kind of evil influence." And I went around, jumped back in my car, drove all the way back to Edgefield, South Carolina. Now, why do I tell you that long story? Well, you pull up a map and you go to the Interstate 57 bridge in Cairo, Illinois, and you're going to find that was right there, very, very close to the center of this TAV Mark. I don't understand God's expansive plan and the way that He does things. And I did not even remember doing this until about a year and a half ago. And when the memory of that came to me, and when I went and looked on a map and saw where that had taken place, I just said, "Lord, this is too big for me. I don't know how to handle this. This is in your hands, God." Right there with that little dot is where that happened. "Thus with great violence shall Babylon the Great be thrown down." As we close and we think about these events, we got to be asking ourselves the question, okay, this is a lot to take in, and it can't be a coincidence. All this stuff can't just be a coincidence. What do we do? Well, here's what you do. "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runneth into it, and is safe." Proverbs 18:10. "I will love thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength in whom I'll trust, my buckler and the horn of my salvation and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord who's worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. Psalm 18, 1 through 3. What do we do? How do we face these events that are coming right at us? He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He's my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. Psalm 91, 1 to 2. Preserve me, O God, for in Thee do I put my trust. Psalm 16, 1. Based on the trajectory of these events and others that we haven't had time to mention, very soon a great cry will be heard. Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. Matthew 25, 6. We've been given a lot of information. It's a lot to consider, I know. Please consider these things. Please take them to heart. Ask Jesus to steer you away from error. Ask Jesus to lead you and guide you. And I'm begging you that from this day forward, that you would keep your eyes firmly fixed on the cross of Jesus Christ, and that you would follow the Lamb wherever He goes. And that's my prayer for you in the name of Jesus right now.